Well, congratulations on making it this far, everybody. It's a strong showing for the end of this magnificent conference. And actually, if I may be so bold, I was going to say to Gary and his team, who have put together an extraordinary RTS, I think a round of applause for what we've seen here. We've had news breaking off almost on the hour, every hour, some great discussions, so it's been a joy, and I'm delighted to be with this final panel of luminaries to, in a way, just reflect on what's been discussed here over the last couple of days, think about some of the big themes and some of the big issues. Guys, you knew that's what you were here to do, right? This isn't a shock to you. No, that's what we're doing. And so let me introduce you. So we have David Abraham, who's CEO of Channel 4. And I don't know if you've said publicly, David, for when your leave date is. Have you said that? Are you...
For a few more weeks.
For a few more weeks. But it is lovely getting out of London, isn't it, up here in Cambridge?
Fantastic.
We have Damian Collins, MP, who is the chair of the Culture, Media and Select Committee, so you'll no doubt have views on basically everything, Damian, so we'll look forward to chatting with you. Fyfield, who is Chief Strategy Officer and Commercial Officer of Sky Group, and I'm assuming that you're about to, because the Sky have put you up, we're delighted to have you, presumably the next CEO of Sky. Is that what's happening? Is that the sort of code? Is that how it, no, I thought that's how it worked. It depends how this goes, I guess. And delighted to have Tom Mockridge, who is CEO of Virgin Media and also chair of the RTS. So congratulations to you also on a great 2 days. So James Murdoch said, and he's not the only one to have said it over the last couple of days, this is a time of great flux and great change and great disruption. And that's what this conference has been embracing. But though that is exciting and we should embrace change and flux, there are a couple of things we've learnt that are absolutely certain. So we're going to start with a couple of certainties that we've learnt over the last couple of days. And one of those certainties, and I'm going to turn to you, David, first, is we are now certain that Channel 4 is moving. And it is going to move out of London in some form or another. So you're obviously delighted about that on one level. How do you feel about that, David? That was something I think you felt wasn't in the best interest of the channel. Is that correct?
Well, let's take one step back. Over the last 2 years, myself, my team, my staff have had to navigate through various kind of unexpected and uninvited political interventions. There was a leak in Whitehall of a document saying that the government was looking at privatising and selling Channel 4 in 2015, and then subsequently there was a manifesto pledge for a full and forced move of Channel 4. So as we sit here today, a few weeks before I hand over to Alex, I'm actually very, very pleased, and I think the staff of Channel 4 are very, very pleased that the government's not selling Channel 4, and it is not intending to forcibly and fully insist on moving Channel 4, if indeed under the current regulatory framework they could indeed effect such a thing.
So the Culture Minister was saying, she said that it could come to that, she could force you.
Yes,
you
but
don't believe that?
Well, no, I think it would require primary legislation, and I think with a government that has a lot on its plate, I can't imagine that necessarily would be a priority. So I welcome the fact that there's been an acknowledgement by the government that it is far better that whatever is going to be decided by the board and by Alex is arrived at consensually and through what is now a good period of time to come to good solutions. So I think on the sort of big existential threats to Channel 4 of the last 2 years, I think we're in a very strong and really good place, and I really welcome, and I think it's a great outcome, particularly for the staff who've had to live with a huge amount of uncertainty for really too long. So clearly it won't be for me now to lead the executive team and the board in making a final set of decisions, but I think over the summer what we have seen, which has been useful and interesting, is a number of external third-party reports which have looked at the very laudable aims that the government have set out around wanting to see a more balanced creative economy, but which highlight whether the policy levers that are being discussed will have the intended effect. Because I think if you look at it purely on an economic basis, there's quite a lot of question marks about disrupting the Channel 4 model and questioning and challenging its future sustainability. The one thing I take great heart from what the Secretary of State said yesterday was an acknowledgement that Channel 4 is continuing to perform in its delivery of its diversity. And so I personally find it slightly contradictory that at the same time we're being accused of living in a bubble.
But just to understand, do you basically buy the argument that there is a way of moving, that there's a need to move it out of London and that's a good thing, but it's just about how you do that correctly? Do you buy that argument? Or?
Well, I think it's not surprising if you have a survey and you put it around the country and say, would you like Channel 4 to move to your town, your city? The overwhelming response would be, of course, we'd love that. And I would answer the same. But one has to think of the question more broadly, which is, what might be the disruptive effects of a substantial move on our staff? We're a relatively small organisation. If you move the same proportion of Channel 4 staff as the BBC moved to Salford, you'd be moving around 50 people, and we've already got around 30 outside London as it is, mostly in Manchester and Glasgow. So I think it's really now to do with the details. And I think that it's equally important to remind ourselves that where we spend our money has the double impact of representing voices from around the UK to the nation, whilst at the same time creating more jobs and stimulating more jobs as a multiplier effect than would be the case if you moved a relatively small number of people outside.
So Damian, there was some of us, or some people in the hall yesterday, as Karen announced it, there was a sort of just a broader feeling of that it was a big announcement, and it felt like a big announcement, but also something perhaps a little odd about a government telling a broadcaster with, commercial broadcaster where it should situate itself. Where are you on this? This is a public good, is it? This is an intervention for the good and something you stand behind?
Well, I've been thinking this week about whether there are other contexts when talking about the television industry that you can use the word unfanciful. And I think
what a week you've had.
And if the question is, will Channel 4 move out of London? You might say that's an unfanciful proposition. There's something to it. It could happen. But I think the language that the Secretary of State used in her speech yesterday was very interesting, which was what it underlined is the government's desire to see a stronger commitment still from Channel 4 to broadcasting in the regions. Now, that could be delivered by Channel 4 locating, but if Channel 4 moved to Leeds, that would be great for Leeds, but wouldn't do very much for regional production companies in the southwest or in other parts of the UK. So I think what would be interesting to look at is, could Channel 4 improve its infrastructure and reach to support its commissioning of regional production companies, its partnership with them, to build on the very successful work it's done through its growth fund of identifying talented young companies and partnering with them? Could you have a model where you have a series of, maybe a series could be more than one, sort of Channel 4 sort of hubs in different cities where they work with local production companies, invest in those production companies, maybe even create a space where startup production companies could work alongside Channel 4 commissioners. And if you could do that in more than one city, that could do a lot more to support the government's ambition of supporting broadcasting in the regions than just picking Channel 4 up from Horseferry Road and putting it somewhere else. So, and I think in her remarks and the language that she used, I thought the Secretary of State was suggesting there is more than one solution to this, but clearly what she wants is a bigger physical commitment to the regions. Now, but of course your initial question was, does the government have the right to ask this? Well, because Channel 4 is publicly owned, sure. It does. So.
But, and the Secretary of State said she'd rather not, but said there were circumstances in which, if you like, force could be used, Channel 4 could be made to do it. She absolutely was clear, that she'd rather not, but is that a credible threat?
Well, I mean, as she said in her speech, she wants to work with Channel 4 and with Alex to come up with a solution which works with Channel 4 and meets the government's objective as well. I mean, beyond that, the government owns Channel 4. Through one mechanism or another, there may well be a way of compelling or forcing Channel 4 to do something. But I don't think anyone wants to see that. But I thought in the remarks, if you look at the words that she used in her speech, I think it's quite clear that what she wants is a move that supports Channel 4's work in the regions, and we'll see an increase in their work and commissioning in the regions, a bigger physical footprint in the regions, but that doesn't necessarily mean moving the whole thing.
Okay, I'm going to come on to another big issue that we learned about this week. Just for Tom, is there anything about that Channel 4, does it seem like a bit of a sideshow to you? Does it feel like a big important part of the ecosystem, this move, or is it just a bit of local difficulty? How do you think about it?
I certainly don't think it's a sideshow, because I think Channel 4 has been extremely successful and effective. And I'm sure David would say it's a team effort, but his tenure has been marked by a very significantly positive performance of Channel 4. Look, I take Damian's point. In the end, you've got to obey your shareholders, and just as I have to go to Liberty Global and ultimately our shareholders, we're all owned by somebody. And I think in the UK, there is a very significant state role in the television industry. The BBC, Channel 4, UK TV, near half audience share is through the state. You've got the public service broadcaster framework, you've got effective subsidies, but in that framework, expecting the people's will to be expressed through elected politicians as part, sort of comes with the turf. You've got to accept whether you regard it good or bad, you've just got to accept that as part of what comes with the structure we have.
So, and obviously not everyone can, I mean, where your office is incredibly important. You're in a beautiful part of the world, Isleworth, which would be the envy of anyone.
A beautiful office, though, if you've been there recently, so...
This is getting a little too personal as to whether or not I've been in Mai's office, but no, I haven't. Again, for you, do you think, almost creatively, making an organisation go through such a big change? And a final point, I was just going to ask David where he thinks the end game for this is, but we've talked about disruption, but does that feel like a sort of useful, valuable way of disrupting an organisation?
To me, the key thing for Channel 4 is how do we make sure that Channel 4 isn't in the London bubble and can tell stories effectively from across the regions? And I tend to agree that this is much more to do with where it spends its money than where its headquarters are. And I think that the challenge is to make sure, even if all the people who work in Channel 4 are sort of from the London area, that their commissioning decisions don't reflect that bias.
But isn't that true of Sky? Most of the commissioning is London-based.
It is true, but Sky, remember, has got a footprint that's much broader than London. We have a very, very large centre in Leeds, and obviously we have call centres around the country.
But in terms of the content, most of that's London-based, and does Sky feel like it doesn't represent Britain? I mean...
No, I'd say I think we probably have more to do, and as Anne was saying earlier, diversity is a really important part of how we think about commissioning, and it's been a real focus at Sky for the last few years, and I think we moved from talking about having more women, for example, in the workplace, to actually doing something about it, and I think it's one of those things where you can see talk is easy, but doesn't actually deliver any results, and if you actually want to change diversity in an organisation, you have to actually take very, very tangible steps, some of which are uncomfortable.
So let's just go to the other certainty we learnt in the last couple of days in this world of change and flux. We learnt with absolute certainty that Sharon White will be invited to the Sky Christmas party, but Karen Bradley unlikely to be. That's my general assessment of the situation. I'm fully aware you're not about to say, okay, I tell you what, now we're in this panel, I tell you exactly what's happening. But I suppose the one question would be that presumably there's a certain amount of time, if a decision isn't made, after which the Sky Fox and Sky together say, look, we've had enough of this. This is costing us too much money. We can't wait forever, and you move on and do something else. Is that a scenario?
I don't think so. I think it is disappointing, right? I mean, we had the expert in broadcasting standards reach a view, and then we had the Secretary of State reach a slightly different view, which is disappointing, and the uncertainty is clearly unwelcome. But we've been here before, and the job of all the management at Sky and everyone at Sky is to just keep focused, don't get distracted, just keep getting on with the day job, and that's what we're doing.
And how much, in your judgment, James has asked about it yesterday, is it, if you like, to do with the kind of baggage, right? The baggage that you accumulate over time that any business does, and actually for the Secretary of State, it just doesn't kind of feel right? Are you aware of that? Does that feel...
I mean, there's always been baggage around the Murdoch family, and that's something that Sky rubs off on Sky sometimes. I don't know. Whether that was anything to do with it, it's not for me to say. I mean, the Secretary of State's come up with her own reasons.
David, I mean, it's a bit odd, isn't it, for the government to sort of ask a regulator and then get a pretty clear signal and then say thanks very much anyway. In other news, this is what we're doing. That's a bit rum, right?
Look, this is not in my area of expertise at all, but what my one observation is that we're having discussions about a structure of an industry that may be becoming surrounded by global changes which make these debates less urgent, less pertinent. I mean, you know, the topics that have been debated by politicians here yesterday, it's not that they're not important, but there are some really huge global changes which have not been perhaps as widely considered by politicians, maybe because they feel they can't do as much about it. But, you know, I think those are the things, if you're running a media company in this country, you're spending more time thinking about. You know, how is internet television going to change the shape of what we're doing from the point of view of Channel 4? How does public service broadcasting get delivered in an increasingly connected world? And obviously at Channel 4, we've been trying to, you know, within the remit that we've got, do our best to make sure we keep that remit as relevant as we possibly can. So we expect politicians to push and prod us, and we are accountable via our elected politicians. But at the same time, the Channel 4 board is actually responsible to a framework which is set out as a statutory corporation, and people sometimes misunderstand it. They think I and the board report to the government. We don't. If that were the case, it would be state-controlled media, which I don't think anyone would want amongst the public. There is
You should check that with Damian, but I suspect
there's a smart degree of separation and a high degree of accountability and transparency. I think that there are bigger issues out there than the ones perhaps that have been the focus.
But just on the specifics of the Sky, the Fox Sky, I mean, are you pleased about the decision? If the decision ultimately is about kicking into long grass or taking, I mean, what would you rather happen? Do you think, so James is arguing, this scale is everything, you know, there's a post-Brexit challenge and this is a real test of it. Do you agree with that?
Listen, I look at this argument about scale and I see mergers happening left, right and centre, but then when I see the scale of the digital giants, my strategic question is any kind of agglomeration of existing legacy media companies ever going to match the scale that now we are confronting? And I very much doubt that is the case.
And we're going to come and touch on some of the sort of new entrants, the Netflixes and Googles in a second. But Tom, you're no stranger to the Murdoch family and to the workings thereof. How do you think this will be being? What will they be thinking right now? What will their views be? How are they handling this?
Look, I thought James handled it very directly yesterday, as did Karen Bradley. I mean, it's very clear she is proceeding cautiously, and as is her right, and there is process, and you can be certainly confident the CMA will be very objective and thorough. It's not at all a politically influenced body. So I think James made it clear that 21st Century Fox would go through that process and thought that they could manage it and emerge from the other side. I work for a company that's called Liberty Global. So we are a consolidator of cable systems across Europe and increasing Latin America. My ultimate controlling shareholder, John Malone, is very, very focused on the need for scale if we are going to compete with the big operators that David's just talking about. So we're certainly aligned with the argument that James was making, and I think it was pretty clear that he's going to go ahead with the process.
So you would feel there'd be significant downsides or some downsides if the deal didn't go ahead? That would be a sad day, would it?
I'm not. Well, sad, happy. I think. Look, there's no.
Which one?
There's no surprise in the fact that Rupert Murdoch has had a significant influence on B-Sky for a long time. In fact, he's Rupert that sent Gary Davey into the caravan in 1985 to get the thing moving.
And I understood you came out just last week, Gary, so it was quite a commitment there from you.
So I don't think that. At a personal level, I think it should be approved and it should be a go ahead. But in the end, it's business. There's referees. We're all interacting with governments and regulators all the time. So you can't be sad or happy about each one. You've got to move on.
And I suppose, Damian, if Karen had actually said, look, I agree with Ofcom, we're going ahead, would have created a bit of a noise at Tory Party HQ, not the best look at the moment. Is that part of the thing? Is it the feeling around it? Is it the feeling, look, we should say, the Murdochs and government are being far too close? Is that what's partly behind this?
I think Karen's been extremely careful to do everything sort of by the book and follow the advice she's been given. In some ways, I think Ofcom put her in quite a difficult position because I think some people would look at what's happened this week and say, why were these issues on broadcasting standards not looked at initially? I don't think any of this unfanciful allegations that were fed in over the summer, they weren't things that were new. They were things that people had been discussing before. So why hadn't they been considered by Ofcom up front? The company's been given the chance to respond much earlier in the process. I think rather than putting her in a position where there's new allegations been made, Ofcom come back and say, well, there may be something to them, but on balance, we think it's okay. You've got a legal obligation then as the Secretary of State to consider that. I don't think she really had any other choice at that point, at that stage in the process, to refer it. I think really Ofcom probably should have looked at those things in more detail much earlier in the process, and maybe that would have made the whole thing a lot smoother. But we were expecting a referral to the CMA on plurality grounds anyway. I think the companies had expected that. This was something new, a broader referral to the CMA on broadcasting standards. I think Tom says she's been cautious. I think she certainly applied the precautionary principle on this, but can do so at a time when Sky is a very successful company. It's not like we're looking at this deal saying Sky is in desperate trouble, desperately needs a new buyer to keep it running, time is of the essence. Actually, Sky is an incredibly successful commercial company that is already, where the Murdochs already enjoy a great degree of influence themselves.
I guess that should be neither here nor there, though, in terms of what your decision-making process is, right?
No, it shouldn't do. But I think that's why, in some ways, the Secretary of State is probably right to say, well, I will follow all the guidance to the letter. I think she was put in a position this week by Ofcom where she didn't have much of a choice other than to refer.
What do you put that down to, Ofcom? What's gone wrong at Ofcom then?
Well, I'm sure the Select Committee will want to discuss this with Sharon in due course, because I think these issues that have been discussed since the summer were ones that they probably should have looked at when conducting their initial fit and proper person test, and also looking initially at the broadcasting standards questions in relation to Fox. And I don't really understand why they were only looked at quite late in the process after
resourcing a particular, as it were, political point of view. What do you suspect?
Well, I think they've clearly had the resources available to go through the 43,000 letters they had about this, and I think a lot of the information that was sent in, the unfanciful bit of it, was information that people had been discussing and debating before. So I think people may rightly say, well, why wasn't this considered up front? Why did Ofcom feel these were new points that were unfanciful and therefore may warrant further investigation? And if you're the Secretary of State and you're suddenly given this information and you're being told, okay, you either refer that or you take the decision that actually there's nothing to see here and you're just going to proceed without referral. And I think in that situation, it's not surprising Karen acted the way she did.
Okay. So there's another issue that's really featured quite heavily, and in a funny way, a bit more heavily than I thought this in the last couple of days, which is diversity, as in something that the industry talks a lot about, it's very committed to. But I think you've really felt people have referred to it a lot. And indeed, we had a session earlier, very well-chaired session on social diversity, which I think really got to the nub of it. I don't know what sort of background you come from. You're free to talk about it or not talk about it. I don't know whether you were state schooled. State school. Good stuff. Oxbridge?
Yes.
Oh, that's disappointing. So we were talking earlier about, how, in a sense, how have people got to the RTS, which is, indeed how have they got into the industry. Can that hold you back? So, a state education. So let's talk. James Panel was talking specifics about how the BBC is going to look at the data, and it was a combination of schooling and what the parents did, and one or two other things. How do you think about it? Important issue, firstly?
Yes, no, actually it's something I personally feel quite strongly about. And I think about it a lot when I recruit for my own team. I don't want, I want to get a very broad mix of people. I don't want a bunch of entitled people. I want people who are scrappy and have had to fight a little bit for where they've got to. I think people like that tend to do very well at Sky.
So, for example, if you, I don't know whether you see CV, I'm sure you have teams to see your CVs, but would you act in favour of someone, for example, who was state educated? Is that something you would do when you say you think about it hard?
I would definitely, in shortlist, make sure I had a good balance on the shortlist, definitely. And I'm always, I always have a sort of belief, I guess, as I said, that people who've had to fight a little bit for where they've got to in life can be very good in a company. And I think a little bit of that scrappiness is good to take into the workplace.
And do you at Sky have measurements and so firstly, have you got the data on your workforce in terms of particularly with social mobility, and do you then have targets? Do you think you should have targets? Is that how you want to work it?
No, I think...
Because you've got targets on other diversity,
We do
right?
have targets on other diversity.
So why not social?
We don't have... I mean, I think this is one of the sort of interesting things that's been discussed over the last few days. How do you actually capture data on social diversity? I think that's quite hard. But I think it's a challenge the whole industry needs to take away and see, because we clearly, as you showed when you had a show of hands, it's not as diverse as we'd all like it to be. So I think we'll take that point away and see what we can do about it.
And David, so if we've identified social mobility as Maya says, a really key area, then it's not that big a jump, is it, to say, well, this is how we're going to measure it, and these are the targets we need to have, and Sharon White thinks that they can be put in place by the time of the next RTS, right? So do you subscribe to that? Is it? What's holding us back?
I think we are, I mean, in the time I've been at Channel 4, I think we've just got more aware and more capable in understanding and measuring and making ourselves accountable to all forms of diversity. And clearly, the Lenny Henry intervention, work that we've done at Channel 4 on disability, which I'm pleased to see in the reports yesterday comes through very clearly. There are new frontiers which are now emerging, and the overlap between those frontiers is very interesting. So BAME and social mobility correlate very closely. We have also been doing quite a lot on social mobility ourselves with external help from the LSE, and I think one of the very interesting things that I'm learning about it is the overlap with millennials. So, and I have chatted about this a bit with Sharon, that in a sense, in previous eras, in the 60s and 70s and 80s of social mobility, it was about having a chance and going to a state school and going to Oxbridge, but in a way then somewhat conforming to the norms of, I suppose, kind of middle-class behaviour. And I think what's very interesting about the millennials coming through is they're challenging us as the generation of people in charge at the moment and saying, how do we get up to where you are, but be more of ourselves? And some of the behavioural norms of being conforming to sort of middle-class ways of talking, middle-class ways of behaving and dressing are being challenged. And I think that's probably a really healthy challenge for...
You were state educated?
Yeah, state educated and Oxbridge.
I'm a bit worried about this side, but at the moment, this side is looking interesting and good.
It's looking good.
But to be clear, in the way that you at Channel 4 have supported other diversity targets,
yes,
I mean, I know it's not for you to speak as Alex, but you expect them to have the same.
Yeah, I envisage that coming in. But we've got to, it sounds like the BBC have been doing some great work in this area. We've got to make sure that the way we approach the data and the way we ask for it, and there's some technical challenges with doing that properly,
sure, which
we have solved in other areas. I'm incredibly proud of the fact that, albeit as a smaller organisation, Channel 4 is performing well in this area. But we all know there's huge amounts more to do. And I think for me and my team, we're also focusing a huge amount at the moment on how to ensure that these millennials get to positions of influence and decision making more universally and more quickly. And I think it's a fabulous thing that, Channel 4 and ITV are now going to be led by women. I think that will have a very big effect on inspiring, new generations coming up through, because they can see people at the very, very top as leaders who are not coming from
Yeah.
the normal expected
And
stereotypes.
Damian, I'm going to read you a quote here.
Okay.
It's not you.
Okay.
By the way, it's not one of those weird ones.
Oh, relax
You
then.
disagree with it. I'll tell you who said it. If you're at a state school, you're less likely to reach the top professions than if you're educated privately. Admittedly, not exactly Martin Luther King. I have a dream. It's Theresa May.
Yeah.
Unusually, for Theresa, it's a relatively downbeat, unexciting statement. But but clearly, she and others want to be seen to be acknowledging this issue. 32% of MPs are from private schools. We're aware that 7% of the population go to private schools. Damien, I'm going to ask you the direct question. Come on, tell us.
Where did I go
Private
to school? I went to a comprehensive school.
I mean, come on. So we are bucking the trend here. So you, therefore, you understand the issues and the challenges facing people who are state educated, for example. Is it a role for government to get stuck in now with the broadcasters and with the broadcasting ecosystem to say this needs to change? Is there something you can do?
Well, I sort of echo some of the things that have been said already, and we have a remarkable consensus in our education because I went to state school, then went to Oxford, and first member of my family to go to university, let alone Oxford or Cambridge. But the question then is, do people come through the system and then they're not born into the liberal elite, but then they're asked to assimilate into it later on and become part of it. So the challenge is not just recruitment, and I think we should proactively look to recruit more diverse people to work in television. And I think the companies are doing that, and there'll be some consensus.
Do you think it's measurable? Do you think social mobility is measurable? Do you think at some point someone, Ofcom, the broadcasters, have to say, we can discuss this forever, but we're basically going to say it's about state education, it's about whether you're on free school, whatever it is, that we agree that's what it's going to be?
I think, yes, of course you can measure anything, but the question is, are you measuring the right thing?
Well, that's my point.
And how much weight do you put on it? So I would look at the output to say, you could have a television company who say, which perfectly mirrors society, but everyone within that organisation is asked to work in a particular way and conform to a particular worldview and work to that. And that could still, the output of that organisation might not be as diverse as you would like it to be. So yes, I think you should note, where do people come from? But I think the challenge is to say, how do we, as an organisation, are we reaching out? Are we commissioning the sorts of programmes that really reflect the society in which we live today? And are we challenging ourselves to do that all the time? And that is just as important, as I think, as monitoring the social backgrounds of the people that work for you.
And Tom, you didn't grow up in the UK. Does this, in some senses, seem like a bit of a British class obsessed? Does this ring true for you? Is it something you care about?
You're teasing the Antipodean chip on my shoulder. And look, absolutely, the language sometimes can be a bit weird. You call private schools public schools. Right. You don't go up to, well, you go to Oxford and Cambridge to read, whereas the rest of us study tech drawing or something. We're the Royal Television Society, not the United Kingdom Television Society. And a lot of what is quality British television celebrates class, either upper class or the noble working class in one form or another. You actually look at what's...
So you think that the output of the content is...
I'm not saying it might be reinforcing stereotypes, I know, but I'm just making a broad observation. Class here seems to me, it's a big issue for panel discussions. I don't find it as much talked about in the workplace or necessarily recognised. But I think it's more a question, as people have touched on. I think the broader issue of economic class, I think, is something much deeper for society to deal with, and that's the fundamental point of politics. In terms of access of a diverse range of people into our industry and an output from that diverse range of industry, I think that's something absolutely we can affect. And I'm a believer in direct action. I'm a believer in quota systems. Which lawyers always tell me, no, you can't say that. But I'd rather set a hard target and be accountable for hitting that target. And I think you can be very direct about gender, well, we have targets, but I'm told I'm not allowed to. I'm not allowed to
hit
make
them.
No, I'm allowed to hit them. You're not allowed to,
that would be weird.
You're not allowed to. In the end, if you make a judgment where you'll actually favour a woman or favour a black person or an Asian or whatever. So we're meant to be careful. But I just believe that you can break through these things.
Would you be in favour of targets about social diversity, socially?
I think
it
depends what you mean. I think it's much harder, social diversity, because but I said, this whole sense of what class is, I haven't quite got my head around in the United Kingdom. in 2017. Maybe it was much more evident 30 or 40 years ago. If it does exist, it should be addressed. I think it's more about this question of elites, and you clearly do have an Oxbridge elite. That's absolutely self-evident, and the fact that people, I do find in business here, if they have been to one of the Oxbridge universities, they let you know within 20 minutes in the conversation.
Yes.
And it's
Like Rupert Murdoch.
well, absolutely. No, but he did, but that helped him. There's no question. That gave him access to something. In fact, that his father could do it. So I'm not saying that. But it's absolutely there, and I can see the pressure around my executive table. People coming in on Monday morning and they're stressed about whether their kids will get into those top 2 or then the next 8 or that. And so I think that's that elite issue, but that's not necessarily class. That's about, I think class contributes to it, but I don't know that it's an output of class.
Okay. This is unfortunately a bit like a greatest hits, this is, because we're going to move on to another area, but that has raised a few questions. But maybe when we come to questions later, people might like to pick up on that. So we've been at this very cool party for 2 days at the RTS. And but there's a sort of slight feeling you get, which is that the really cool kids were invited to the party but haven't come. Netflix, Google, Amazon, Apple, and YouTube, there may be the odd representative, so I'm not saying there's no, but broadly they haven't come in great numbers, as indeed they don't perhaps to Edinburgh and others. So what makes it even worse is we're talking about them all the time and they're still not coming. So they're really cool. I've no idea if they're talking about us, but I'm sort of suspecting possibly not. But they loom large. They loom large over this conference and others. So we're sort of trying to unpack what they mean, if indeed you can group them together. I might just start with you, Mai, actually. There's a sort of my Tom divide here, possibly, which is you invite them onto your platform. Do you have Netflix, for example, on?
No, we don't.
Exactly.
They do.
It's the wrong way around.
Yeah, wrong way around.
And action. Mai, you don't invite them onto your platform. And you do.
Correct. Yeah.
Good, got that sorted. Yeah. We'll move on to something else now. So Mai, does that speak of a larger attitude to you, which is best not to invite them in, we'll plough our furrow, let them do theirs, and is that sustainable?
I think that's an oversimplification.
I thought so.
With respect, because I think the tech giants have done a great thing for the TV industry. They've created all these platforms that we're all using. So, all Sky customers have access to Sky Go. Sky Go only really exists because we have smartphones that Apple produced and we have Samsung devices with Android on them. So, in a sense, they've done a great thing. They've sort of freed the content from the TV screen and given all of our customers and viewers the chance to engage with our content on multiple devices. And as a result of that, TV consumption or video consumption is pretty much at an all-time high. So they have done a great thing for the TV industry as a whole. I think there are tensions when it comes to everyone's looks at their balance sheets and the amount of profits they make and is worried that if they come after content, that the rest of us will be left in the dust.
But they are, which they're doing, right? That's
to a degree, but I think we sort of overreact a little bit. I mean, I think Facebook has talked about spending $1 billion. That's globally. Apple's a similar amount. These companies haven't got where they've got to today by just spending money because they've got the money. They spend money because we're in businesses where they can expect to make a sensible return. And so the fact that they, make hundreds of millions of pounds, it's just because they look at content doesn't mean they're going to spend all that money in the content business. They're going to spend money where they can make money back. And I think if you think about the industry as a whole, take, for example, Netflix, massive company, but relatively small in terms of its buying power in the UK. I mean, so Sky's revenue is not far off 12 billion across all the markets that we compete in. Netflix in the UK, I'd be surprised if it was $500 million. Like their ability to spend money here, yes, they can spend money here, but they're not about to outspend every single broadcaster in the UK. There's room for all of us. And I think that we sometimes fall into a position of think it's a them and us. I don't think it is. I mean, Netflix has done really well, Sky's done really well, Channel 4's doing really well, Virgin's doing really well. There's plenty of space for all of us.
That's a snapshot of where we are today.
Yeah.
The direction of travel would seem...
For me, the biggest issue is the competition for the TV screen in the corner, in the living room. So, these Google, Apple have had a big influence on smartphones. They're all kind of thinking, actually, where is video really watched? Still, 90% of all video is watched on the main screen. That is the next battleground, and that's important for Sky and it's important for Virgin Media. But it's also important for every single broadcaster in this room because those screens are not regulated. There is no EPG regulation, there is no due prominence. And those platforms, like Apple TV, for example, they are VOD-centric platforms. There is no linear TV on those platforms. And,
so you would like more regulation, right? Well, one of your approaches is to say we need to regulate.
Well, I think it needs to be, I think the problem is the fact that it's not even.
Right.
That the regulation that's one-sided has the potential to impact where the market goes. Markets should go in directions because of competition on the merits, not because some lot are regulated and others aren't. And I think that's a dangerous
But it's an unusual
trend.
position for Scott. You're calling for regulation, right? Or have I misinterpreted?
No, I think we're calling for a level playing field, and
But
some of it may
what?
be
Through
less regulation elsewhere.
Okay.
But I think there is a role for some regulation in some places. But I think, as we've talked about before, regulating the tech giants is difficult. You know, it may be that some of that's not possible. But I think as an industry, we really do need to think about platforms that have no linear channels and it's all VOD. What does that mean for commercially funded advertising services like ITV and Channel 4? That is a massive shift. And whether the kinds of revenues that ITV and Channel 4 can make today, where the market is still anchored on linear, whether they can sustain that in a purely VOD world is a big, big question.
And David, I mean, actually, in the 7 years of you've been at Channel 4 and the way this story has played out, rapid speed, so you've sort of been watching it. See, I mean, a big question really, but where is it going? So where do you think it's going?
I remember sitting on this panel, I think in 2010 when I was new. Broadband penetration was around 50% in the UK. Smartphone penetration was below 50%. The iPad had just been launched. We couldn't watch reliable streaming video on a main screen in the living room. YouView hadn't been launched. So we have navigated through vast amounts of sort of structural change which were anticipated and which we focused on through the development of what's now All 4, our data strategy, 15 million registered viewers. And from our point of view, because I remember being told on the panel, but Sky will be outspending you on original content by X. And, you know, through a combination of, I think, brilliant creative leadership under Jay and understanding what our brand proposition is, we have spent our money well to maintain our brand position, maintain our portfolio share above 10%, which is very similar to where it was when we were a single analog channel 20 years ago. I would take issue with the fact that your model is any more sustainable against the digital giants than our ad model. Certainly the numbers in terms of the penetration of big basic in the UK and the unbundling of basic in the US would suggest that the massive premiums that your business model has been based on are now seriously in question. But be that as it may, I think if one is a niche player with a strong brand and great creative teams producing amazing content that's brilliantly marketed, I think there's always a way to survive. I think the issue right now is about growth. The ad market is down, and right now we don't know when it's going to recover, and that is going to have an effect on the amount of money that ITV and Channel 4 can spend on content. There's no doubt about it. But we've been through these cycles before, and we've got a great pipeline of strong shows that I think can help us navigate.
But where a couple of discussions over the conference. One, you had the Andy Willman and Andy Harries talking about the excitement for the fact that they back talent in their view. The SVODs, they back your talent, they pay you properly, and they sort of say, get on with it, which is exciting for a creative.
And they keep all the rights.
And then James Murdoch saying, beware the shiny bauble, it's not quite what it's... And you, I mean, where do you...
Look, we co-produce a huge amount of big shows with those players now. I think really this is a question of where do we think things will be in sort of 5 to 10 years' time. And there's no doubt about it. I think, you know, if you talk to anyone in San Francisco or LA right now, there's a tremendous sense of change happening. And there's a tremendous sense of the volume of money that Apple and Amazon and Netflix are spending is having a structural effect at just the time that big basic is unbundling across the US. Ad markets are holding up better in the US and it's a very big market. So I think this is really about, will mainstream television still be culturally dominant in 5 to 10 years' time? I absolutely believe it will. Will the growth rates be quite as good as they have been in the last few years? That, at the moment, is more unclear, but we don't know how to detach in the UK the Brexit effect from the structural effects of some of these platforms. It's impossible to do, and no one really knows.
Okay. And Tom, how do you think about the threat or the opportunity of these guys? Is one of the things you're thinking, get closer to the content, invest in content? Is that one of your...
Yeah, absolutely. The answer to that is one of them. But fundamentally, we see it as opportunity, because at its core, we're a broadband Wi-Fi supply company as our core product. And whichever way you look at it, the demand on our network is running at 50% plus increase a year. I was on Watchdog recently because we were clobbered for not keeping the investment up with the demand, quite rightly. And that's compound growth rate. And overwhelmingly, that's video. And what's happening, all the video is moving into an IP format for convenience, and that does make it more in on-demand formats, but also in linear formats. And I think the takeout of that story is ultimately it's a much better environment for producers of video and programming. There's more opportunity. I mean, you heard some of the opportunities with the two Andys. Now, maybe theirs were particularly spectacular because of the sort of start-up nature of the deals they got. But you can see Netflix now widen its portfolio. We've had a good relationship with them over 4 years. They're morphing much more into sort of a big HBO, for want of a better word. So I think, look, it's whatever we think about it, it's happening at a spectacular pace, and we have to adjust. I think it's inevitable. Sky will adjust, ultimately moving away from a satellite distribution to an IP format, and linear TV will be fundamentally IP. And it's going to be, and ultimately that's about more reach and more opportunities to view, which means more opportunities for people making television.
Is the speed of that change why you're worried, or how worried are you about the speed of your broadband rollout? Because there's been a lot of heat about that the last few months.
Exactly. We had some hiccups there, and it's not so much a question about worry, it's a question about getting on with it. I had a problem where we stumbled over ourselves in getting permitting with local authorities, and so we fell a bit behind, and some people made a few errors, and we had to let those people go. I think maybe good people. But the real story there is we've got 6,000 people out there today, literally digging holes in the ground and putting fibre in there and building an alternative network to BT. But that's the opportunity. You've got an international investor willing to put billions of pounds into the UK in an infrastructure competition because of that opportunity on the internet, which I say is all about video, which has been all about people in this room making great programming to travel on it. There is a continuity to that story.
And Damian, I mean, Mike wasn't exactly calling for regulation, but you opened the possibility that it's one way to address it. Is that right? I mean, should you basically be rethinking what the media market is and thinking slightly root and branch? Okay, I mean, Sharon was very clear, they are media companies. You know, that needs a new approach, right? Is that how you see it?
I think this is the right debate to have, because the landscape could completely change over the next, I think, the next decade to the next BBC World Charter. You know, in the past, we've had debates saying, how do we manage the BBC's dominance of the UK market landscape, which is secured to them by the licence fee, this huge budget they have every year, which just arrives in a cheque. But the next licence, in 10 years' time, we might be saying, well, actually, the BBC is struggling, cannot run the range of services it runs with the licence fee at the level it is, and it is struggling to grow its commercial revenues, can't produce the volume of high-quality programmes we expect because the market is there's massive inflation in the market caused by external players. You know, what would be the consequence to Sky if Amazon bought the Premier League rights? You know, what would be the consequence for Virgin if ITV said we're not going to be a PSB anymore? You know, we want to sell the rights to Coronation Street to the highest bidder, and we're going to do our own thing because we live in a world where being number 3 on the schedule doesn't matter anymore. So I think I agree with David that we don't yet know what the consequence of this is, but I think we've got companies with almost a limitless budget, certainly Apple and Amazon, that can take an investment decision in TV which they might not see any money back for 6, 7, 8 years, and that won't bother them. It's about and I think for us to believe that won't have a massively disrupting effect, I think would be naive. And I also think as well, I think this is bigger than any one national government's ability to control it as well.
What would the consequence for Sky be if Amazon bought
we just adjust. There's a lot of money there we'd have to spend on other types of content, right? And Gary would be really happy.
In fact, you're basically willing it to happen.
No.
It sounds incredible.
No, but I think we've lost types of content before. We've lost the Champions League. You just adjust. You spend the money elsewhere and you spend it wisely.
But for you guys, it must be perhaps particularly, you know, the seeing these companies rise out of the sea, the sheer scale of them, sheer depth of their pockets. That's not. I mean, that's not happened before, right? I mean, that's a new thing for all of us.
I think we all forget how much money BT actually makes. You know, BT is a much more scary competitor than Netflix in many, many ways. Right. It is a much more profitable company than Amazon as well. It's a Goliath.
Right.
I think there's also what is unknown is the tolerance of the consumer to toggle between so many different devices and billing systems and brands in order to get the good content that they want. And we just don't know. It's very early days in this new behavior pattern, but there is an inconvenience barrier which is building up. And I think that also plays to the dynamics around the pricing of everyone's services. And we've had persistent price inflation between Virgin and Sky to the consumer in recent years against the backdrop of this unbundling occurring. And I think pricing and packaging and consumer tolerance is where the new battle line will play out.
And David, one of the things that you've been very open and public about is, over the last couple of years, your sort of concern about consolidation on a sort of general level, but actually particularly in the production sector. It continues apace. That's still something you think is structurally concerning and worrying, is it, for you, for the health of the British?
I remember when I made that speech, you were very worried, Tim. I remember you agreeing with me in 2014. No, listen, 2014 was a pivotal moment in my time at Channel 4 because we were looking towards the 2015 election, and there was a sense that the coalition, that I remember quite fondly as a rather benign form of government, was going to change, and that somewhat more ideological forces would come into play and rattle the cages of public service broadcasters, which indeed they did at a time when Brexit was also playing out. And I will, in my dotage, reflect, I think, on the connection between those two things. Be that as it may, there is still so much, I think, that can be done by politicians who I know believe in the core principles of public service broadcasting and the interrelationship between it and the sense of what it is to be a citizen of this country and to understand the whole country and all its regions back to itself. And the fact is, even today, with all this change, I think it's still over 75% of the hours watched are to content that's made in this country. And we're human beings living in a particular culture with particular weather, and there are some things I agree with that therefore global players can't penetrate as long as we remain really good at our jobs. And I have to say, I think BBC, ITV, Channel 4 are fabulously good at doing what we're meant to be doing.
Thank you, David. So what we're going to do is open up to some questions for 5 minutes, and if there are any, I can tell you other areas are available. We've done fake news, challenge to advertising. You've all been here, so there's all sorts of other areas, or you can go over some of the areas you've just heard about. And yes, gentlemen up back there.
Hi guys, Peter White from Broadcast Magazine. A couple, one for Tom and one for David. Tom, I wondered if you could talk about the sort of original commissioning move that Virgin has started to get into. It seems like you're starting to commission original drama, and just wondered if you could put that into context given what we've heard. And also just a quick one for David, whether he would like to tell us all about his new venture.
He's desperate to. He's absolutely desperate to. So, but Tom.
Well, very quickly, we have now the direct relationship with All3 Media, which is a fantastic company with a great breadth of talent. And so working with them and working across the Liberty Group, so we're doing co-productions with the other European companies in Liberty, and also seeking US support. We have worked with All3 Media on commissioning now a series of programs. We'll have a first release on Virgin, and then, of course, look to distribute elsewhere. But look, I don't want to overstate. We're not going to be, taking on the scale of a Netflix or anything like that. We believe, like I think everybody in this room, that you need to have something that distinguishes you, that something's of interesting and stimulating, and you might even call it a marketing strategy. But there's great people at all three media, so we thought we'd take advantage of that relationship.
David, what are you doing next? That's the question.
Well, I am still completing the longest worked notice period in corporate history, which has got some weeks to run. I'm then going to take a holiday, and hopefully you'll hear all about what I'm going to do next in the new year.
Are you sad to be going, David?
Channel 4 it's an amazing institution, honestly. I've loved every single day of working there. It's been, an amazing ride. It's amazing people, huge amounts of talent. So of course I will miss it, but I'm also really proud to have done my bit, and I'm really looking forward to handing over to Alex and then starting a new life.
You heard it here first. Yes.
Deborah Williams, of Creative Diversity Network. There's been a lot of talk about diversity in the past 3 days, which has been very interesting. And flick forward to the next RTS, Cambridge. What impact do you think all of the work that you've been discussing and talking about, and that I'm doing, and that the broadcasts are doing, the Core 5 broadcasts are doing, what impact do you think is going to have?
Who would like to take any takers? Damian, yeah, sure.
Well, I hope progress. I think the great thing you've done, Deborah, with your work is, and others as well, is making us look at the numbers, look at the things as they actually are. I think a slightly different debate. I think the consequence of publishing BBC talent pay has made us confront the issue of gender pay in a way that we simply wouldn't have done without being confronted by that. So there have been a lot of good studies published this year, and I hope in 2 years' time we see progress on all fronts.
The Secretary of State seems to have ruled out, if I understood correctly, something I think you're very interested in, which is broadening the way the BBC measures its pay differentials, right? So in other words, to indie sector and BBC Worldwide. That's what I heard.
Well, it's not
disappointed.
Well, no, actually, she cited what I'd said, which is that I think, as far as licence fee payers are concerned, if a very large cheque is going to a presenter, the fact that to present a show on BBC One, the fact that that's made by an independent production company, rather means that pay shouldn't be disclosed. I don't think people understand that distinction, and I think the idea that saying that the salaries of the talent on Strictly Come Dancing now have to be declared this year, but next year they won't because BBC Studios is now an indie. I don't think people will understand that, and what the Secretary of State said in her remarks, she sort of referred to what I'd said at the Edinburgh Festival, but also says she thought the BBC should lead the way on this. And I think that there was a consensus from everyone who wasn't from the BBC in Edinburgh that this is an inevitable journey, I think, that we're going on now, public disclosure.
So you're asking the BBC to reveal, and indies to reveal what they're paying talent, which is what you want, and you think that's going to happen?
Well, I think it will happen. I mean, David Clementi is quite right to say that there's no legal requirement for them to do that, and they may stick by that. But I think, I think there'll be a question of perception, and without wishing to personalise it, if you say, at the moment, when the salaries were declared, the fact that they don't have to declare what David Dimbleby gets for presenting Question Time, but they have to declare what Hugh Edwards gets for presenting the news. I think a lot of licence fee payers don't understand how that distinction can be drawn. I don't think it means we have to get into the dot and comma of what every actor on every drama gets paid, but I think for those big salaries, where for sort of iconic, constantly recommissioned BBC programmes, the idea that those salaries aren't declared but everyone else's is, I don't think that is a sustainable position.
Okay. And just on the broader question of diversity, Sky actually came out pretty loud and proud early on with some targets 2 or 3 years ago. Do you think that momentum is going to sustain, keep going? Is that how you...
I think we've done pretty well on diversity for women, and with BAME on screen. I think the shift within Sky now is moving to broader diversity in all its aspects. And I think what we've shown with both of women in the workplace and with BAME on screen is that if we take positive action, and if we have things like 50-50 shortlists, if we sponsor up-and-coming talent and we encourage people to fulfill their full potential, that we can actually make a difference. So I think what we'll see over the next 2 years is applying some of that thinking to other areas of diversity. So I'm hoping that at the next RTS, when we come back, we'll have something that we can be proud to talk about.
Okay. Any other? There's time for one last question. No, I'm being given that sign. Gosh, that's, I would say, slightly unnecessarily aggressive, but I understand what you mean. So each of you, I want to thank you. I was going to tell you what I was going to do. I'm still going to do it anyway. One sentence each, because world of opportunity. Tell me something we should be excited by. One after the other. I know this is horrible when you do this. David, what should we be excited by?
Electric Dreams, 9 o'clock Sunday night, Channel 4.
Good. Mike, you're going to, no, don't say the same. That would be
No.
off. What should we be excited by?
Drone Racing League.
I don't know what that means.
You check it out online.
Drone Racing
Company
League.
we've invested in. It's
Okay, it's a
super
company.
cool. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. This is actually working very well. Tom, what should we be excited about?
Truly seamless Wi-Fi wherever you are.
It's okay to dream, is what you're saying.
Well, given everyone's plugging their own content, I'd have to say the appearance of the Secretary of State in front of the Select Committee on the 11th of October.
There you go.